Did you know your brain can learn a language while you're sleeping? Well, sort of. A recent Stanford study found that passive exposure to language, even in a semi-conscious state, can improve vocabulary retention by up to 23%. Today, we're diving into the revolution happening in English language learning, specifically how podcasts and modern methods are transforming the way we become fluent. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why traditional classroom learning might be holding you back and how to leverage cutting-edge techniques for faster progress. So help me understand, what's really changed in language learning over the past few years?
You know what's fascinating? The entire landscape of language learning has been completely turned upside down. We're seeing this massive shift away from textbooks and grammar drills toward what researchers call immersive microlearning. And, well, the data is pretty mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing how?
So, according to a 2024 study from the University of Cambridge, learners using modern methods like podcast immersion are achieving fluency up to 40% faster than traditional classroom learners.
Wait, what? 40% faster?
Yeah, and here's the really interesting part. It's not just about speed. The retention rates are significantly higher too. When people learn through engaging content they actually care about, like podcasts about their favorite topics, their brain creates these stronger neural connections.
That makes so much sense when you think about it.
Right? And you know what's really cool? There's this student in Tokyo, Aki, who shared her story online. She went from struggling with basic conversations to conducting business meetings in English in just 8 months, mainly through podcast immersion and social learning apps.
8 months? That's incredible. But what exactly was she doing differently?
So she basically created this, what researchers call a linguistic ecosystem. Instead of studying grammar for hours, she surrounded herself with English content. Podcasts during her commute, English YouTube while cooking, language exchange apps during lunch breaks.
You know, speaking of podcasts, what's the actual science behind why they're so effective for language learning?
Well, a recent MIT study found that podcast learning activates both the language and pleasure centers in the brain simultaneously. When you're engaged with interesting content, your brain releases dopamine, which basically supercharges the learning process.
That's fascinating. And I guess that's why boring textbooks don't work as well?
Exactly. And you know what's really interesting? There's actually a connection between music and language learning that's pretty mind-blowing.
Oh, really? Tell me more about that.
Research shows that people who listen to music in their target language, even just in the background, show improved pronunciation and rhythm patterns. It's like your brain is secretly decoding the language's musical elements.
That's incredible. But let's circle back to podcasts for a moment. What should people actually look for in a language learning podcast?
So the key is finding what researchers call comprehensible input, content that's just slightly above your current level. You want to understand about 70 to 80% of what you're hearing.
And what if you're understanding less than that?
That's where transcripts come in. A study from the University of Michigan found that using transcripts while listening can boost comprehension by up to 50%.
You know what's really interesting about gaming communities and language learning?
What's that?
There's this whole phenomenon of people learning English through gaming Discord servers and Twitch streams. The real-time interaction and casual environment actually creates this perfect learning space.
That's such a good point. And it ties into something really counterintuitive about language learning.
What's that?
Making mistakes in public spaces like Discord or Twitch can actually accelerate your learning. The fear of making mistakes holds so many people back, but research shows that those who embrace making errors in public progress much faster.
That's really interesting. But what about people who aren't into gaming?
Well, there's this whole ecosystem of language learning apps now. The key is finding what works for your lifestyle and interests.
Speaking of apps, have you heard about these new AI language partners?
Oh, yeah. The technology has come so far. These AI partners can adapt to your level, correct your mistakes in real time, and even understand context.
That's pretty amazing. But let's talk about some practical strategies. What's the ideal daily routine for someone wanting to improve their English?
Based on recent research, the magic number seems to be 20-20-20. That's 20 minutes of active learning, 20 minutes of speaking practice, and 20 minutes of passive listening like podcasts.
That actually sounds pretty manageable.
Right? And here's what's really cool. You can stack these activities, like listening to podcasts during your commute or workout. That's that passive learning taken care of.
But what about the speaking practice? That seems harder to fit in.
You know what's interesting? Research shows that even talking to yourself in English can improve fluency. But obviously, conversation partners are better.
Really? Talking to yourself?
Yeah. The key is active engagement. Whether you're describing your day, explaining a concept, or even arguing with yourself about a topic, it all helps build those neural pathways.
Let's talk about common mistakes people make when trying to improve their English.
The biggest one, according to research, focusing too much on perfect grammar and not enough on actual communication.
That's interesting. What else?
Another big one is what researchers call the comfort zone trap. People stick to content they already understand well instead of pushing themselves with slightly more challenging material.
So how do you find that sweet spot?
The research suggests following the 80-20 rule. About 80% of your content should be at your current level and 20% should stretch you a bit.
That makes sense. And I guess that's where choosing the right podcast comes in?
Exactly. And you know what's really interesting about podcast learning?
What's that?
Studies show that learners who listen to podcasts in various accents and dialects develop better overall comprehension skills. It's like training your ear to be more adaptable.
That's fascinating. But what about people who say they don't have time for all this?
Well, that's where the concept of microlearning comes in. Research shows that even 5-minute sessions, if they're consistent, can lead to significant improvement over time.
So it's really about consistency more than duration?
Absolutely. A recent study found that 10 minutes daily is more effective than 2 hours once a week.
Let's talk about measuring progress. How can people track their improvement?
One really effective method is what researchers call the comprehension journal. Track what percentage of a podcast you understand at first listen, then revisit the same episode a month later.
Oh, that's clever.
And you know what's really motivating? Most people see a 15 and 20% improvement in comprehension when they revisit content after a month of consistent practice.
Those are some impressive numbers. So when you step back from everything we've covered, what's the key takeaway?
The research is clear. Language learning has fundamentally changed. It's no longer about memorizing rules and vocabulary lists. It's about immersion, engagement, and finding methods that work for your lifestyle.
And podcasts are clearly a powerful tool in that journey.
Absolutely. They're like this perfect storm of convenience, engagement, and effective learning all rolled into one.
So what's one action our listeners can take today?
Start with just 10 minutes. Find a podcast you enjoy, not a language learning podcast, just any English podcast about a topic you love. Listen to it once without transcripts, then again with them.
That sounds doable.
And remember that study about learning while sleeping? You can actually play podcasts at a very low volume while you're falling asleep. Your brain will still pick up patterns and pronunciation.
Well, that brings us full circle. Thanks for joining us on Copilot Podcasts. Remember, every podcast you listen to is a step toward fluency, even this one.